Well, what do we have here, precious friends? It looks like maybe a pile of odd little hamburger patties, but they're not. And they also look kind of like cookies. Well, if you thought they looked like cookies, you would be right. These are, believe it or not, carnivore cookies. They look like cookies, and they taste like cookies too. Well, some purists might think they don't taste like cookies, but as far as a carnivore is concerned, and all the carnivores I've had taste these, they're cookies, okay? And we're going to explore how to do this today. So this recipe was inspired by the crust recipe for Anita Breeze's no-bake cheesecake that we made at the Meatstock retreat, which is also in my cookbook, Meatstock 2025 cookbook. And everybody loved it so much. We had a little bit of we baked it as a crumble to sprinkle on top of the cheesecake, which was served in dishes, instead of doing it the other way around, which would have been way too complicated for the size of the group that we had. But so we served it in bowls, and we made the crust, and we crushed it into little crumbs into a streusel and sprinkled it on top, and that was very successful. And we had a little bit of the streusel left over, and people just kept nibbling at it and picking at it, telling us it was so delicious, and of course it was. And it just made me think, it's so much like a cookie crumb crust. I wonder if you could actually make a cookie out of it. So I've been working on that for a little bit, and I think I've got it down. So thank you, Anita, for the inspiration. And I decided back at the retreat that they ought to be called pig cookies because they're made out of pork rinds. What's more perfect than that? Pork rinds for dessert. Butter and pork rinds. I don't know what we as carnivores would do without butter and pork rinds. But anyway, let's get started. So here we have roughly a cup of ground pork rinds, and I have measured it as 72 grams. Okay. I find that measuring by weight is so much more accurate than measuring by volume in most cases, unless you're working with really small amounts. So this is a cup, roughly 72 grams, which is 2.5 ounces of ground pork rinds, and they're ground pretty fine. You could leave big chunks in there if you wanted to, but I like the texture of the cookie better when it's pretty finely ground. And here we have a tablespoon of melted butter, and we're just going to drizzle that in here. And so far this is exactly like Anita's recipe, but Anita's recipe, she put in 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, which I am going to repeat right here. And I'm going to add a couple of extra things just to make them more cookie-like. I am going to add about 1/4 teaspoon of ground cardamom. It smells so fantastic. And I just like everything that has cinnamon in it. I very often add a pinch of ground cardamom just because I like the way the flavors play together. I think the cardamom makes the cinnamon taste cinnamonier, if that's a word. And just because we're going to try and make them more cookie flavored, and I love the flavor of mixed spice. This is maybe a tiny bit less than 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. That's a very assertive flavor, so be careful with that. And just to round out the spicy flavor, I'm going to add a few scrapes of nutmeg. Now, friends, if you're going to use nutmeg, please go ahead and source yourself some whole nutmegs and grate them yourself. If you have whole nutmegs in a jar in your cupboard, they will last for years. Pre-ground nutmeg will last 6 months at best without losing its flavor. And, yeah, that's about, just scrape it for, 10 or 15 seconds. Be careful with nutmeg. Some people think it tastes like soap. If you're one of those people, just leave it out. But that was 20 or 30 scrapes of nutmeg, okay? Plus the tablespoon of butter. Now, here's the next thing. I gotta raise this camera because I gotta look you in the face to say this. Now, I realize this is gonna be a problem for people. And I really, if you just can't manage to do it, I understand, just leave it out. The recipe will work, but it works better like this. So this is molasses. And yes, clutch our pearls, it's sugar. It is. It is sugar, folks. I'm not going to try and pretend that it's not. But we are going to put, or I'm going to put a teaspoon, not tablespoon, a teaspoon of molasses in this recipe. And there's two reasons for it. One of the reasons is it's going to improve the texture of the cookie. It's going to improve the way, it's going to improve the pork rinds capacity to cling together like a cookie, right? These have an unfortunate tendency, I had to fiddle with this a bit, to kind of just, as you bake them, they just fall apart sometimes. And you don't really want that. It's not going to really make a cookie. I mean, it's still tasty, but it has a texture of granola instead of a cookie. So that's the first reason. It helps with the texture of the cookie. The second reason is it adds so much flavor. A teaspoon of molasses is 5 grams of carbohydrate. Okay, now you can't handle it. You don't want it. You do you, boo-boo. You know me. But this is going to help. The amount of improvement in flavor that you get for such a minimal carbohydrate hit, to me, makes it absolutely worth doing. Okay, so I'm going to put the molasses in. If you don't want to put the molasses in, you go ahead and leave it out. You'll just have a more fragile cookie. That's all there is to it. And it won't taste quite the same. But like I said, you do you. At our bowl, this molasses jar tends to stick. So I'm just going to eyeball this. You can measure it if you want to. I'm just going to eyeball that. And that is just about a teaspoon of dark molasses. And the next is allulose. This is the brand that I just buy at my local market. And we are going to put 2 tablespoons of allulose in here. Now, there was some talk in Anita's recipe about using glycine instead of allulose to make it the most carnivore that you could get. And you could do that. However, the glycine doesn't work for the cookie. The allulose is a natural sugar. I'm going to get a fork and we can stir this up while I gab. The allulose is a natural sugar, but my understanding is it's got an odd shape, and the molecule does, and your guts don't suck it up. Your intestines don't. Your small intestine doesn't uptake it the same way it would sucrose. So you only absorb about 10% of it. So it is a low calorie, even though it's a natural sugar, it is a low carb sweetener. Okay, so we're just gonna stir this up. This is a very, very, basically the same kind of recipe that you would use to make a graham cracker crust, except that we're using pork rinds. So there we go. And it does take a little bit to get the molasses evenly distributed. So I find mixing it with like a mashing sort of a motion with the fork just helps distribute everything really, really evenly. So there we go. That is our cookie mixture, folks. And you'll notice it's really loose and fluffy, but that's okay. We're going to set that aside. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need a mold for these cookies because they don't shape themselves very well. And you could use a cookie cutter, a round cookie cutter, but what I found was I made this little shaper thing. And I just took this. We got a piece of 18-inch wide heavy-duty aluminum foil. And it's about 8 inches it's 18 inches this way and about 8 inches this way. And so what I did was, to make my cookie mold, is I just took this, folded in half, and then fold it in half again. Crease it down real good. And then fold it in half once again. So you've got a long, flexible strip. And then see, that's what you got now. And then you want to take something that's about between 2.5 and 3 inches in diameter. Because the cookies I have found, they are better if they're not too big. So I'm just going to wind this around here. And overlap it real good. See, I got about an 1.5 inch overlap. Okay, and then I'm going to fold this up this way so that this part is perpendicular to the ring, and just to hold it in place, I'm going to fold this down through here like this. And then I'm going to bend it back up. Okay, and then I'm going to fold it one more around like that. And this holds the ring in place, holds the circle in place. Okay, and now if you have a cookie cutter that's about this size, you could use that. But most cookie cutters have a handle or an arch or ring going across like this a ways. You might recognize this shape as like a cookie cutter. And this little handle from the top is a problem. So I found that the cookie cutters that I had didn't really work very well. So that's why I made this little device, and you'll see why in a minute. So our next is to prepare the pan. Now I have a sheet of parchment here. Now you may have noticed that when you use a sheet of parchment, it always curls up. It doesn't really matter which side you put down. It tends to curl up either way, as you can see. So this is just a little trick. If you work with parchment paper and the parchment paper doesn't want to lay flat, this is what you do. You wad it up and you throw it in the trash. No, I'm kidding. You wad it up like this, crush it up nice and real good, and then you just take it and spread it out again. And when you've done this to the parchment paper, baking parchment is really cool, because once you've done this, it'll kind of pretty much stay in whatever shape you want it to be. Even if you want to like line a separate kind of pan with it, look, watch this. I could like even turn the edges up and make kind of a little boat out of it, and it would stay. If I wanted to bake something wet that I wanted to contain, it'll even do that. So if you're working with an uncooperative sheet of parchment, just crunch it up and spread it out again, and it will stay put in almost any position that you want it to. See, there we go. So now, here we go. We're going to shape some cookies. Here's our cookie mixture. We're going to put our little mold down here. And this will make approximately 10 cookies. And so I'm going to get a nice like rounded tablespoon scoop. And I did weigh this, and it's about 15 to 16 grams. And then I'm just going to compress it a little bit into the tablespoon. And I'm going to drop this by tablespoons onto the cookie tray. And you'll notice I'm spreading them out kind of far. I'm spreading them out because we are going to pat these down. And it's just easier to do it, to get them all on the tray first. If you run across any like lumps of the molasses as you're going through, just kind of use your spoon or your fork to just knock them apart and mix them around. See, we got our 10 cookies, and there's a few crumbs left in the bottom. If you can manage to do something with those, more power to you. But there we go. Now, we're going to take our little shot glass that we had our butter in, and you can use any flat-bottomed item that's small enough to do this. And we're going to put the cookie mold down. And we're going to hold the edges down with our fingers, and we're just going to take this little shot glass and pat cookie down, lift off the mold. There we go. Really, you can't really shape these cookies any other way. But it doesn't take very long. If they fall apart as you lift the mold off, just pat them back together. There you go. Whoops. See? So I am going to, oops. They will hold together after they're baked, I promise. So I'm going to finish patting these out and show them to you right before I slip them in the oven. Here are our cookies, all shaped, okay? They are pretty loose and crumbly right now. You don't have to worry about that. That will correct as it cooks in the oven. The allulose will melt, the molasses will melt, and it'll kind of act as a glue. Once it gets hot, it'll kind of act as a glue to glue the cookies together, so to speak. Okay? Not to mention the molasses making everything delicious. So, behind me, I have my oven set to 300 degrees. You want it set at 300 degrees. That's the other thing about allulose, is it browns very, very well. It browns even better than sucrose or table sugar does, in my opinion. So you got to be careful. Don't bake these at 350. We're going to bake them at 300. And we're going to bake them for 15 minutes. So I'm going to put them in and set the timer. There we go. And I'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Well, we're back, friends, and our timer's about to go off, and we're going to pull these cookies out and go on to the next step. There we go. So here they come. Here are our cookies. Now, you got to depan these in a particular way, and you'll see why you really do need to put them on parchment, because at this point you cannot use a spatula to remove these from the pan because they will fall apart. They will not firm up until they have cooled. So the reason you put them on a sheet of parchment is because you can grab your little sheet of parchment right here, tip the pan, slide it right out just like that. Because if you try to lift these with a spatula, they're just going to come apart. Okay, so the next step is we got to let these cool. So I will be back with you in probably about 20 minutes after they're cool. But I will tell you something. They smell absolutely delicious. I can't wait. So it's been about 15 minutes and our cookies have cooled. And you can see they're holding together quite nicely. So we're just going to remove them from the cookie sheet and put them on a plate. Here are our lovely little pig cookies. So now, of course, we have to taste them. Mmm. They're crispy. And they do have a tiny little bit of chewiness in them. I can taste all the spices. And the molasses flavor is definitely giving it, how would you say, a fuller, rounder flavor in the mouth. They are not what you would technically call sweet. If you're looking for like a real sweet, super sweet, desserty sort of a cookie, maybe this is not for you, but this is just perfect as far as I'm concerned. And if you wanted to do it an easier way, what you could do is just press the mixture, unbaked mixture, out flat on a cookie sheet onto a prepared surface like we had for the cookies, and just pat it out in a layer about that thick, and bake it for the same amount of time. Take it out, let it cool, and then you can just break pieces off to eat it like that if you didn't want to go through the hassle of like shaping the cookies. Or you could just crush it up roughly into large crumbs and use it to sprinkle on top of things like some yogurt or some Dr. Kilt's ice cream or Anita's no-bake cheesecake recipe. So there we have it. Pig cookies, friends. You're going to love them. And we'll be back again soon with another recipe. And I think maybe next time we're going to revisit Anita's cheesecake recipe, but we're going to zhuzh it up by making several different flavors. Okay? See y'all later. Love you. Thank you for joining me again in Chef Patty's Kitchen on the Carnivore Hippie channel. Bye-bye.